The first team here today, we do not know what slot it was, but it is a super flex league and it has Patrick Mahomes on it. So I would say with that in mind that it is a relatively early slot in it, but it's a full PPR, 2 flex, 1 super flex league. This comes in from Cole, so thanks, Cole, for sending in the roster for us to have a look at. He said if you're ever looking for a roster to talk about in the pod, here's his Dynasty startup that he just drafted. So he tried to go as young as possible and hit on some big values. He said keep up the great work, so thanks for the kind words. Looking at the roster, we have Patrick Mahomes, Breece Hall, James Cook, T. Higgins, Treylon Burks. Then at tight end, we have Pat Fairmouth, Rashad Bateman, Rondell Moore, and Russell Wilson. So at the moment, that's what's locked in as the starting lineup. So we're going for 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks, and a tight end as that build. On the bench, then, we have Sam Howell as a backup quarterback. We have Eno Benjamin. We have Rashad White. We have Isaiah Spiller, Will Fuller, KJ Hamler, Anthony Schwartz, Tutu Atwell, Joshua Palmer, Jalen Tolbert, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jameson Williams, Gerald Everett, Foster Moreau, and Tommy Tremble, who actually did feature on that recent episode for a brief period of time with Stealing Bananas as they talked about the situation, obviously, with Baker Mayfield signing with the Panthers. The taxi squad in this does also have Malik Willis, so we will mention that. It is, at the moment, a 4 quarterback build, but Sam Howell is the only one on the bench. So there is some players, Sean, we like there on the bench. How are we feeling? We'll do this in reverse. How are we feeling about the depth before we jump on to the actual starting roster at the moment? And this roster does, as I mentioned, have KJ Hamler and Gerald Everett on the bench. So Sean's just trying to figure out how we get those guys into the starting lineup.
Well, Colm now is definitely elevating my enthusiasm for Gerald Everett to new levels. And, that's one of our pure sort of opportunity plays, which is a play that we don't do that often, but it's an opportunity to play that's also based on the talent of Herbert and this potential for a late breakout for Gerald Everett there. But one of the things that I really like about this roster that you can tell, even not knowing the exact rounds, but looking at the overall composition, is that this team went at the positions that they needed to go at the right juncture and went for the ages that they needed to go at the right juncture. One of the things that we see from time to time is that teams will be conservative and play for veterans early. They've got a little bit of that win now mode, and they switch over to young players late and take a lot of young players who really aren't ever going to contribute. It's not that it's impossible, but the probabilities are extremely low. And so you've got a team that's going to be declining in trade value with those veterans that you drafted early, and then your lottery picks are unlikely to pay off for you. You really want to do it in the opposite fashion, where your early round picks are young and have so much potential that, number one, they're probably going to outscore what you have in mind for them right away. You look at some of these players in the starting lineups, like a Treylon Burks, a Rashad Bateman, a James Cook, even though we like Devin Singletary quite a bit, a Breece Hall. Those players are probably going to mildly outperform. At the very least, they have a very wide range of outcomes and a high talent level, which is something that you want to put into rosters of all kinds. But then you look here on the bench, you can tell that Rashad White and Isaiah Spiller were drafted in good slots. Then I like some of the veteran options here, where we have a Will Fuller, we have a KJ Hamler. Hamler hasn't played much, but is already trending into that veteran area. You have a Gerald Everett. So you've layered in a couple of veteran picks who are fantastic values, and it could round out this very young roster. That's the thing that you'd like to see. And then the depth is still young in a lot of ways, where you have Benjamin, you have Jalen Tolbert, you have Wan'Dale Robinson, Jameson Williams right here on the bench because he's not expected to start at the beginning of the season. Colm, I think this is the perfect roster. You might look at Russell Wilson and wonder what the price was there, and if a different option maybe made sense when we're looking at more than the next couple of years. Anytime that you're looking at that QB position, it's that real tension between how many years are there and how much production is there. One of the things that I do like to do, similar to the last point, is you want to get that QB star at the beginning, but then move to more immediate production in that round 10, round 11 range, depending on what kind of format you're in. In the FFPC RV Triflex leagues, you can only draft 3, and that creates an interesting dynamic where these sort of second and third tiers, and I'm talking about that from a very big picture perspective, not necessarily how we have them on the site tiered, those players tend to drop because the managers know they're not going to be able to draft 4 or 5 based on what other managers are doing. You can get some immediate production there. Russell Wilson, an interesting player. He's kind of in that intermediate space where he's getting older. He's probably not going to put up the same rushing yards, but he is into this elite offense. He probably will score a lot of points for you in the next year or two with all of the weapons. We say elite offense. The elite offense is going to rely on him. He's got to be the driver for that, but they have surrounded him with guys who should make that possible. We expect Denver, especially within the context of Kansas City, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas, also at least looking like high-powered offenses. The AFC West is going to be shootout central. I think you have to really like the overall complexion of this team, but then the specific picks as well are just very, very exciting.
Yeah, and when we look through it, you mentioned, the age, and he also mentioned it, but really when we look through it, like Will Fuller and Gerald Everett are the real veterans off the roster. Everyone else is kind of in their first kind of 3 seasons in the league outside of the 2 quarterbacks. So it's a very young roster that should be ascending in value. And even if things don't hit for them in year 1, they still will maintain some value. Whereas if you have those veterans, like let's say a Will Fuller, and things don't go right this year, it's probably worth nothing at that point. But interesting as well, James Cook was in the starting lineup that I referenced, but Rashad White could be the guy that you're putting in there come week 1, Isaiah Spiller, and also Breece Hall was the other one. So a lot of rookie running backs in there, and which was a pretty strong start to that rookie running back class. So looking through overall here, I think it's a really nice roster based on the right cost. The one you mentioned about Wilson, it might be something that you could move out of Wilson on this roster for maybe a slightly lower ranked quarterback, but maybe get a pick or get some pieces in there as well. But really, really positive overall start to this. And then we'll see what happens with Ryan Tannehill's contract after this season, and Malik Willis could be another piece that comes into this roster. But thanks to Cole for sitting in that roster. Really stacked, doing a lot of the right things. Looks really positive there. Next question, Sean, comes in from Greg Dudek. We have back-to-back Gregs for these next 2 rosters, but both different Gregs. So, hi, Colm. I was wondering if you and Sean might take some time to discuss a Dynasty roster of mine on RVOT to go along with your recent pod on Dynasty Tactics. He's particularly interested in the situation where does he burn it to the ground, or does he keep those young elite Dynasty assets and maybe try and see where he can contend this year? So it's a Superflex tight end premium 12-team league. They did the startup last year, so we're 1 year removed from that startup, heading into the second year. Starting lineup is quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 3 flex, and a super flex. So we have a possibility here of starting 6 wide receivers. Of course, you could also go and start 5 running backs if you wanted, but based on a lot of the stuff we talk about, the flex positions, we're trying to win that flex with the receiver position. So in the startup, he drafted Josh Allen, Kirk Cousins, and Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback. He had Kareem Hunt, Zach Moss as his running backs. Then that was also added to with Diggs, Ayuk, Gallup, Rager, Crowder, and his tight ends were Darren Waller and Albert O. In the rookie draft, he picked up Trey Lance, Etienne, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He mentions among others as well. Sometime last summer, he decided to kind of blow the team up and decided that he thought it wasn't going to be competitive. He ended up moving Allen, Diggs, Waller, Gallup, and ultimately got his current roster, which is Lance, Etienne, Michael Carter, Jamar Chase, Elijah Moore, St. Brown, Pitts, Ayuk, Albert O, Rondell Moore, Kirk Cousins, and Mac Jones. And on the bench, he has Tony Pollard, Zach Moss, Chuba Hubbard, Khalil Herbert, among others, Sean, that are sprinkled in there as well. So when we look through it, he says he has 4 2023 thirds, but no firsts. He had no 2022 firsts. In 2024, things get back to normal pick-wise, but without Lance and Etienne last year finished poorly. So there's a lot of good young talent on this team, particularly with Chase and Pitts, potentially Lance if he starts, and then Etienne if he's healthy. He thinks he could be competitive this year, but his question is, in a situation where blowing it up even more, which would mean moving Chase, Pitts, and Lance for 2023 picks, makes sense, or does it make more sense to bide his time to 2024 and beyond? So, of course, this fits into Greg's question here and his roster, but it circles back to the point as well. I know we talk about the windows and using these players and then trading them. But when is that window too early when you have somebody like Chase and Pitts and Lance, who are like haven't really even started that window yet, if it makes sense. So a lot to unpack in that question, Sean, but what are we thinking Greg should do here?
This is the case where I think that there are moves that can be made, but I would probably stay away from moving the stars, because the main reason he was able to get to this point where you have Chase and Pitts and some of these other young players and Trey Lance is moving those first. He mentions he didn't have any 2022 firsts. That probably wasn't a huge problem. We had a lot of guys we liked in this draft, but it's not going to set you back multiple years based on the players who are on the roster. Not having any 2023 firsts is unfortunate when you have this young team, but at the same time, you've got the pieces here now to have a juggernaut for a long, long time in Lance and Pitts and Jamar Chase. You've got two of the top 10 guys, which we always like to see. Trey Lance could move into that discussion over the course of this next season. You have some other fun young players in terms of Elijah Moore, Amon-Ra, Ayuk, someone who probably will bounce back in value, if not this year, then next year. Have Albert O, Rondell Moore. To have that quarterback situation too, where even after you've moved Josh Allen, to still have not only Lance, but Kirk Cousins and Mac Jones, you've got the three guys. That's very, very helpful. I actually think this team will be competitive. And so it's not necessarily an issue where you have to move back out of players in order to get those 2023 first to keep things going. That said, if you're able to move someone like a Kirk Cousins, who does still have plenty of value in any type of super flex format because of the weapons he has around him and how important it is to get points in the super flex spot, and in many cases to use veterans. And now that we've had some guys play deep into their 30s, you're actually going to get a little bit better value on even players like a Kirk Cousins in his 30s than you would have gotten previously. So from that perspective, those are some of the players I would move. We talk a lot about, if you are a rebuilding team, don't be afraid to move your stars, but it's just very difficult to move players of the level of Lance, Pitts, and Chase. You just have to get so much back. Not many teams actually even have that really on their roster. Definitely not something where they can move those picks and still be competitive, which is obviously what they would want to do if they're getting a player like that back. Now, it may be a little bit different in your league. If you have another manager who could give you the value of 3 or 3.5 firsts, I really think that Chase especially is someone who probably is even above that 3 first level that I currently have him ranked at. That's sort of our top tier. I have him as the number 2 overall player behind only Josh Allen. Obviously, he's going to have to continue to be very good to stay ahead of Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. But because you have Mac Jones, I think that you can move Cousins. You can move a lot of these other guys, and maybe even move a Travis Etienne, who is now generating a lot of enthusiasm, moving up in redraft. Redraft and Dynasty are obviously different, right? But redraft will send you a lot of signals in the same way that best ball early on will send signals to what the Dynasty value is going to be. In a case here where a young back, and he's still young, even though he came into the NFL a little bit older and then didn't play that first year. When a young back is moving up there in redraft, we know that his Dynasty value also is going to be getting that bounce. And yet, because of the problems with the Jaguars, because of the situations that James Robinson is still there, even though he probably won't be a huge factor in 2022, and because Etienne, a little bit of a similar situation to Najee Harris, where those guys are, I mean, they're not old, and if they played well to 27, like we've witnessed from players like Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook, then you're definitely going to get the value back simply by holding them and playing them and score a lot of points. But anything that goes wrong with Etienne at this point, another injury, poor performance because the Jaguars are terrible, not actually being able to rack up quite the number of receptions that people want him to have, his value can disappear quickly, and he's at that position where you can move him and continue to churn in Dynasty. So those would be some of the things I would look at. I think the biggest thing here would be to try and develop more bench depth. The bench that has been named here by Greg isn't particularly strong. Maybe not even a lot of hold candidates from the perspective of even on bigger rosters. Now, we do like Tremble and Pierre Strong, definitely somebody that we're holding hopefully for the future. But I think that would be kind of the path that I would be looking at. Cousins and Etienne as the guys who can move. The risk with keeping ETN is that there could be huge differences in the value in the first month. He's someone who could jump into that 2023 kind of, not necessarily first round in a super flex, but first round in regular formats and redrafts, or a second round, early to mid second round in a super flex startup type of draft. If you move him before that, you're going to lose out on that growth if he starts out very slowly, and then you're trying to move him in season. I mean, Kirk Cousins is someone you might move in season to see just how explosive they actually are. If that gives him another bump, it also gives you the chance to kind of see where your team is. And especially in the starting lineup, this team has firepower and youth, so it should be competitive with the 3 good quarterbacks. Those would be my thoughts. I mean, this is not a team that I would blow up. It's not a team that I would try and move pieces to win now with. It's a team that I think is kind of moving into that permanent championship window. You want to look at the players and pieces you have that will make you a little bit better without doing anything that I think sets you back multiple years in terms of getting where you want to be.
Yeah, and when you look at, like, there's players that you can look to move, like you talked with ETN, young players who can still be moved, but then there's players who are just exceptional at that extreme end of elite upside and chase. And this has been a tight end premium league as well. We haven't even scratched the surface yet with Kyle Pitts and what he can do, and it's going to be very, very hard to give that up and move. But players like Ayuk may not have the value now, but the likes of ETN, I think he is the main one to move, and Cousins, who you already mentioned. So yeah, the tricky part on this is how deep the rosters are. As I mentioned at the start, with the quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, tight end, and then the 3 flexes. So I think up as far as the 3 flexes, this team is in a really good spot. It's just that little bit of depth, and obviously you could get that from moving Chase, but I think you're going to be going in 2024 and looking to see how you could get Jamar Chase back on your roster, and that's probably not going to be possible. But thanks to Greg for sending that question. Hopefully that is beneficial, hearing Shawn's insights there.